She's alive.
Freezing nurse at Victoria Station. The Richest Duke found her. Their love story shocked London. She had saved 11 lives that winter. Not one person stopped to save hers. The snow had been falling since midnight, burying London under a silence so thick it felt like the city had simply decided to forget certain people existed. The kind of people who sat alone on iron benches outside Victoria Station with no ticket, no coin, and no name worth speaking in polite company. Beatrice Holloway was 26 years old, the finest trained nurse in the whole of St. Bartholomew's Hospital, and she was dying. Her auburn hair lay damp beneath a gray wool hat. Her fingers, still wrapped around the handle of her brown leather medical satchel, had gone the color of bone. She had stopped feeling her feet an hour ago. She had stopped feeling much of anything at all. Around her, the crowds of Victoria Station moved like a river parting around a stone, purposeful, indifferent, utterly unbothered by the young woman slumped on the bench as though she were simply sleeping. She was not sleeping. 3 weeks earlier, Beatrice had walked into the office of Dr. Harlow Vane, chief physician of St. Bartholomew's, and made the catastrophic mistake of saying no. No to his hand on her waist. No to his suggestion that a woman of her background ought to be grateful for whatever attention a man of his standing chose to offer. She had said no clearly, firmly, and without apology. By morning, her name had been removed from every hospital registry in London. By the following week, every private household she approached for nursing work had received an anonymous letter describing her as unstable, dishonest, and morally unsuitable. Dr. Vane had not raised his voice once. He had simply erased her. Now London was finishing the job. She felt the cold pulling her down like deep water, and she thought distantly that it was almost peaceful, the way suffering eventually became quiet. Her grip on the satchel loosened. The gas lamps above the station entrance blurred into soft orange halos. The last coherent thought that crossed her mind before the darkness took her was not of her mother, not of her training, not of the 11 patients she had pulled back from the edge that winter. It was a single, furious, devastated thought that it should end like this, here, for nothing. She did not see the man in the dark overcoat stop. Alistair Vexmore, the Duke of Stonehaven, had not intended to be at Victoria Station that evening. He had come to collect a package from his solicitor's courier, and he had every intention of being back in his Mayfair townhouse within the hour, in front of a fire, with a glass of brandy and no further obligation to the world. He was 34 years old, possessed of the kind of angular, severe face that made people across ballrooms decide quickly whether they admired him or feared him, and he had long since stopped caring which way they landed. He was 3 steps past the bench when something made him stop. He turned. He looked. He crossed back in 6 rapid strides and crouched in front of her, one black-gloved hand going to her cheek. The cold of her skin made him pull his breath sharply through his teeth. "She's alive," he said to no one in particular, because there was no one paying enough attention to hear him. He took her up in his arms, satchel and all, because even unconscious her grip had not entirely released it, and he carried her through the falling snow to his waiting carriage, and he did not put her down until she was inside it. She was placed in the finest guest room of Stonehaven House by midnight, with a fire burning high, and his personal physician summoned from across the city at considerable expense and considerable volume. While Dr. Pemberton worked, Alistair stood in the corridor outside with his arms crossed and a feeling in his chest he couldn't quite name. Not pity. Something more unsettled than pity. When Pemberton emerged and confirmed she would survive, Alistair permitted himself to breathe again. She was unconscious for nearly 18 hours. During that time, Alistair did something he would later pretend was merely practical. He opened her satchel. What he found was not what he expected. 3 letters of commendation, each signed by a different senior physician, each describing Nurse Beatrice Holloway in language that bordered on reverence. A certificate of advanced training, A pressed list of patients' names in her own handwriting with notes beside each one. Small, careful reminders. Window open in morning. Dislikes the smell of camphor. Frightened of needles but won't say so. He read every page twice. By the time Beatrice opened her eyes to find herself in a room the size of her entire former lodgings, with silk curtains and a coal fire and a glass of water on the nightstand, and she had already been understood more thoroughly than she knew. She sat up. She reached immediately for her satchel. "It's on the chair beside you," said a voice from the doorway. She turned. The Duke of Stonehaven filled the doorframe with the particular ease of a man who had never in his life needed to make himself smaller for a room. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't immediately read, composed, careful, and something underneath that she didn't have the energy to examine. "You were unconscious on a bench at Victoria Station," he said. "I brought you here. You're safe." Beatrice looked at him for a long moment. A powerful man. A wealthy man. A man who now knew her name, her history, her commendations, and presumably her humiliation. Every instinct she had built over the past 3 weeks told her to thank him and leave before he could use any of it against her. "I need to go," she said. "You need to eat something first," he said, "and then I have a proposition I'd like you to consider. My mother is unwell. Her current physician is competent but disengaged, and she has declined steadily for 3 months. Based on what I read in your satchel, which I will apologize for, though I won't pretend I regret it, you are more than qualified. The position is live-in, the salary is significant, and no letter from Dr. Vane will reach you inside this house." She stared at him. He said Vane's name as though he already knew the shape of what had happened, and offered no commentary on it, no judgment, no pity, simply acknowledged it as a fact and moved past it. It was the most dignity anyone had shown her in 3 weeks. She hated how much that undid her. "I'll eat something," she said carefully, "and then I'll listen." She stayed. Lady Dorothea Vexmore was not what Beatrice had been prepared for. The Dowager Duchess was 71, iron-spined, sharp-tongued, and approximately as welcoming as a closed door in January. Within 48 hours of Beatrice's arrival, she had summoned Alistair to her rooms and informed him that she would not be attended by some common girl dredged up from a train station bench, that the appointment was an embarrassment to the family name, and that she expected the matter corrected by morning. Beatrice, who had been listening from the corridor, not intentionally, but the Dowager carried her opinions at considerable volume, straightened her back, walked into the room uninvited, and spoke before she could lose her nerve. She told Lady Dorothea her qualifications. She told her the specific errors the previous physician had made in her treatment, and exactly how she would correct them. She told her that she had not survived what she had survived to be dismissed without a single day's trial, and that if after 1 week Lady Dorothea wished her gone, she would leave without argument. The silence that followed was spectacular. "1 week," Lady Dorothea said finally, "and you will stay out of my way when I am not in need of medical attention." "Completely," Beatrice agreed. Alistair, who had arrived in the doorway just in time to witness the whole exchange, said nothing. But she caught the expression on his face as she passed him in the corridor, a flash of something warm and startled, and she filed it away in the part of herself she was trying very hard to keep locked. What followed was not a swift thaw. It was slower than that, more grudging and considerably more interesting. Lady Dorothea did not warm to Beatrice so much as she ran out of reasons to resist her. It happened in accumulated increments, none of them dramatic on their own. The first was medical. Within 10 days, following Beatrice's adjusted treatment, the Dowager was sleeping through the night for the first time in months. She did not thank Beatrice for this. She simply stopped complaining about her presence in the mornings, which amounted to the same thing. The second was a Tuesday afternoon when Beatrice arrived for the regular afternoon examination and found Lady Dorothea attempting, with considerable frustration and deteriorating dignity, to reach a book on the upper shelf of her sitting room bookcase. Beatrice retrieved it without comment and set it on the table beside her chair. Lady Dorothea looked at the cover, then at Beatrice and said with great suspicion, Have you read Middlemarch? 3 times, Beatrice said. A pause. Sit down, then, said Lady Dorothea, and tell me what you make of Dorothea Brooke, because I have been arguing with my late husband about that woman for 20 years, and I find I am not finished. They talked for 2 hours. Lady Dorothea disagreed with nearly everything Beatrice said, but she disagreed with the focused attention of someone who finds the conversation genuinely worthwhile, which was, Beatrice had come to understand, the highest form of respect the dowager knew how to offer. After that, the afternoon examinations regularly ran long. The third shift was quieter still. One evening, passing the dowager's sitting room on the way to her own, Beatrice heard a sound she didn't immediately recognize. Thin, careful, and slightly out of tune. She stopped. Through the half-open door, she could see Lady Dorothea seated at the small piano in the corner, playing something slow and old with the concentrated effort of someone returning to a thing they had set down too long ago. She was entirely alone. She did not know she was being heard. Beatrice stood in the corridor for a moment and then walked quietly past. She did not mention it the next morning, and neither did Lady Dorothea, and somehow that unspoken agreement became its own kind of intimacy, the understanding that some private things can be witnessed without being taken. And then there were the evenings in the library. Alistair had a habit of reading after 10 o'clock. Beatrice had a habit of checking the reference texts after her duties were finished. These two habits created a problem, which was that they kept finding themselves alone together in a room full of firelight and silence, and the conversations that started as professional courtesies kept becoming something else entirely. One evening, she pulled a book from the lower shelf and found the margins covered, every page dense with penciled notes, questions, underlinings, whole sentences of argument conducted in the white space beside the printed text. She turned to the frontispiece, a child's handwriting on the inside cover, careful and slightly uneven. Alistair James Vexmore, aged 9. You did all of this? She asked. He looked up from his chair. When he saw which book she was holding, something moved across his face briefly and was contained. My father and I used to read aloud together, he said, every Sunday evening from the time I was old enough to follow the words. I would write down whatever I didn't understand, and he would explain it the following week. A pause. He died when I was 19. He reached over and took the book from her hands. He closed it. He set it on the table beside him and did not open it again that evening. She sat down across from him without saying anything, because some things don't need answering, and they read in silence for another hour, and it was the most companionable Beatrice had felt in longer than she could remember. She reminded herself, walking back to her room that night, that this man held every advantage over her, that she was employed in his house, that the last powerful man who had shown her particular attention had destroyed her life without a second thought. She did not intend to make that mistake twice. And then Lady Dorothea stopped breathing. It was 2 a.m. Beatrice was awake by some instinct she had long since stopped questioning, and was at the dowager's bedside within minutes of the first sound. A strange, strained silence where breathing should have been. Severe respiratory obstruction. She had seen it once before, as a student, and she had watched the patient die while the physicians debated the appropriate course of action. She did not debate. What she did over the next 11 minutes, alone in near darkness, with instruments from her satchel and the absolute focused stillness of someone who has chosen, in the most fundamental sense, to be a nurse, was not something she could easily describe afterward. But when Alistair arrived at the door, roused by some instinct of his own, Lady Dorothea was breathing again, slowly, carefully, but breathing. He stood in the doorway looking at his mother's chest rising and falling, and then he looked at Beatrice kneeling beside the bed with her sleeves rolled to the elbow, and something in his face broke open entirely. The following morning, Lady Dorothea woke, looked at Beatrice sitting beside her and said, I suppose you'll be insufferable about this. Then she reached out and pressed her hand once, briefly, and let go. That was the closest the Dowager Duchess of Stonehaven had come to saying thank you in 40 years. Everyone in the household understood it perfectly. A week later, Alistair found Beatrice alone in the garden. He told her that what he felt for her was not gratitude or obligation or charity. He told her it was the realest thing that had happened to him in longer than he could remember. He told her he loved her. She listened to all of it with her hands clasped and her throat tight. "I don't know how to trust this," she said finally. "Not because of anything you've done. Because of everything I know about what happens when men with power decide they want something from women who have none." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to trust me yet. I'm asking you to let me earn it." She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She walked back inside with her heart in pieces and her head full of the particular agony of wanting something and being terrified of it in equal measure. What happened next arrived in the gossip columns 3 days later. Her name, his name, the nature of their arrangement rendered in the salacious shorthand of London society journalism. And then, within 24 hours, a visitor, Dr. Harlow Vane, well-dressed and pleasant-faced and utterly without conscience, presenting himself at the front door with a carefully worded threat, dressed up as a social call. He would be attending the Ashworth Ball at the end of the week. He felt certain that a public conversation about Nurse Holloway's history would be of great interest to those assembled. He left smiling. Beatrice told Alistair everything that evening, the full account, from Vane's office to the letters to the bench at Victoria Station. She told it flatly, without performance, watching his face. She was prepared for the careful recalibration she had seen on men's faces before, when inconvenient truths arrived wearing a woman's story. His expression did not recalibrate. It went very still and very cold, and he said, "You will attend the Ashworth Ball. You will stand beside me, and you will not face him alone. Not any more." The Ashworth Ball was London's most attended event of the season. Every titled family, every prominent physician, every gossip columnist and self-appointed arbiter of proper behavior was present. Beatrice arrived in a deep navy gown, her chin level, her hands completely steady, and her heart hammering so hard she was distantly surprised no one could hear it. Vane made his move within the first hour. He was good at it. The gathering of nearby ears, the concerned tone, the careful devastation. He had barely finished his second sentence when the room changed. Lady Dorothea Vexmore, Dowager Duchess of Stonehaven, 71 years old and the most formidable woman in any room she had ever entered, stood up from her chair. She did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. She simply began to speak, and the room went quiet with the instinct of 200 people who understood immediately that something significant was happening. And she described what Beatrice had done for her. She described the night she had stopped breathing and the woman who had saved her life, alone, in the dark, without hesitation. She described Dr. Vane's letters, which Alistair had obtained copies of through means that bore no scrutiny, and she named them for what they were in front of every witness London society could offer, without flinching once. Vane opened his mouth. He found he had nothing left to say. The room was very quiet. And then, from somewhere near the back, a single person began to applaud. Beatrice stood in the middle of it all and did not move for a long moment. She was aware of the eyes on her, dozens of them, recalibrating, reassessing, rearranging their understanding of who she was and what she deserved. She was aware of Alistair standing at her shoulder, unsteady and close. She was aware of Lady Dorothea lowering herself back into her chair with the particular satisfaction of a woman who has said exactly what needed to be said and has no regrets whatsoever. But mostly she was aware of something shifting inside her own chest, quiet, enormous, and long overdue. She thought about the bench at Victoria Station, the cold, the crowds who had walked past. She thought about the morning she had stood in Dr. Vane's office and said no, not knowing what it would cost her, knowing only that she could not say anything else. She had paid for that no with everything she had. Standing in this ballroom, surrounded by the whole of London society watching a powerful man discover he was not as powerful as he believed, she understood something she hadn't been able to see before, that every single thing she had lost had simply been clearing the ground. For this room, this moment, this life that was finally, unmistakably hers. She had not just survived the night. She had survived all of it. That night, in the quiet of the Stonehaven Library, Alistair knelt. She said yes before he had finished asking. They were married 6 weeks later in a small private ceremony that scandalized exactly the people it was meant to scandalize. Lady Dorothea wept, which she denied afterward with tremendous conviction. The household staff lined the corridor from the drawing room to the front door. Cook had made something extraordinary involving almonds and late winter pears. It was the most unconventional, impractical, and entirely genuine wedding anyone present had ever attended, not because of what it had, but because of what it didn't have: performance, pretense, or a single moment that wasn't real. Beatrice stood at the front of that small room in a cream dress that was not fashionable and did not try to be, and she held the hands of a man who had read every page of her twice, and she thought about the bench at Victoria Station, and the cold, and the satchel she had not let go of even while unconscious, as if some part of her had always known she wasn't finished yet. She had been right. Within 2 years, the Duke and Duchess of Stonehaven had established London's first charity hospital, offering free medical care to the city's poor regardless of background, profession, or standing. The staff were the finest Beatrice could recruit, and the standard of care was, by every account, exceptional. On the front of the building, above the door, carved into Portland stone and gilded in gold leaf, were 2 words: the Holloway Wing. She had arrived at Victoria Station with nothing but a satchel and the stubborn, unreasonable refusal to stop being exactly who she was. She had been erased by a coward, frozen by a city, and underestimated by nearly everyone she had ever met. Some love stories change one person. This one changed a city. Before you go, drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching this from. There is something extraordinary about knowing that a story set on a snow-covered bench in 1890 London is being watched right now in cities and towns its characters could never have imagined. We are always moved to see where these tales land. If this one stayed with you, subscribe, because the next story is already written and it promises to captivate you. We think you'll want to be there for it.